The story is set in Putna and revolves around Shohnaz and Jafar Uddin. Shohnaz grew up in Putna, surrounded by her loving family. As she blossomed into a young woman, her parents decided it was time to find her a suitable husband. They wanted someone who was not only well-educated, but also well-settled, a man who could provide Shohnaz with a life of comfort and happiness. After a long search, they found Jafar Uddin, a young man from Lisadi, a town not far from Putna. Jafar Uddin was an electrical engineer who had secured a prestigious job in Saudi Arabia. This was seen as a golden opportunity, a sign that he was capable of providing a prosperous future. The proposal was put forth, and Shohnaz's parents agreed it was a perfect match. The wedding was a grand celebration, filled with joy and the promise of a bright future. After the marriage, Shohnaz and Jafar Uddin's life together began on a sweet note. The couple seemed happy, and life went on smoothly for a while. As time passed, Jafar Uddin decided to leave his job in Saudi Arabia. He moved to Noida with Shohnaz and their 2 young sons, seeking a fresh start closer to home. For 2 years, they lived in Noida, adjusting to the rhythm of their new life. As May approached, bringing with it the festival of Eid, Jafar Uddin suggested it was time for a visit home. They had not been back to Putna for a long time, and with Eid on the horizon, it felt like the perfect occasion. Besides, Jafar Uddin had built a new house right next to Shohnaz's parents' home, using the money he had carefully saved during his years in Saudi Arabia. The thought of celebrating Eid in their new home filled them with joy. On the 1st of May, they boarded a flight from Delhi to Putna, filled with excitement. The next day, on the evening of the 2nd of May, Jafar Uddin took their sons out for a bit of shopping, perhaps to buy some special treats or gifts for the upcoming celebration. Later that night, Shohnaz prepared a lavish dinner, including Jafar Uddin's favorite chicken biryani. After dinner, he ate with his wife and children, then went to sleep. Early the next morning, his elder son woke up before everyone else, feeling uneasy. He went to his father's room. When he opened the door, what he saw was truly terrifying. His father's lifeless body was sprawled out on the floor. Beside him lay a pressure cooker smeared with blood. It looked like the pressure cooker had been used as a weapon. Overcome with shock, the son screamed in horror, his voice echoing through the house. Shohnaz and the rest of the family rushed to the scene. Neighbors soon gathered, and the news spread like wildfire. It was the day before Eid, a time meant for joy, but the house was now filled with deep sorrow. The celebration turned into a time of mourning. Without delay, the police were called. They arrived quickly, took custody of the body, and sent it for a post-mortem examination. The investigation began immediately. The police started questioning family members and neighbors to gather clues. When they spoke to the son, he told them that he had woken up early and went to his father's room, only to find him lying there lifeless. They asked Shohnaz to explain what had happened that night. She started by saying that earlier in the evening, they had gone out to do some Eid shopping together. After returning home, they had dinner as a family, and everything seemed normal. But at around 3 a.m., she was suddenly awakened by strange noises. Curious and worried, she got out of bed and stepped out of her room to check what was going on. As soon as she walked out, 2 strangers suddenly attacked her. They grabbed her roughly, snatching her jewelry, and then one of them covered her nose with their hand. She could feel something strange on their hand, and before she knew it, everything went black as she lost consciousness. Initially, the police suspected that this was a case of robbery, but something didn't add up. Except for Shohnaz's necklace, nothing else in the house was stolen. This made the police suspicious. Why would the intruders kill someone without taking anything of value? The officers began to consider a different motive. This suggests that the attackers didn't come just to rob the house, but might have had a personal grudge or enmity, one of the officers remarked. The police then started questioning everyone closely, trying to dig up any possible leads. They discovered that Jafar Uddin, Shohnaz's husband, had spent most of his life working outside of Bihar, far from home. Because of this, he didn't have many acquaintances or friends in the area, and as far as anyone knew, he didn't have any enemies either. The police couldn't help but find it strange that, despite the money and jewelry in the house, none of it had been taken. This odd detail made them suspect that something wasn't right. To dig deeper, they began carefully examining all the possible ways someone could have entered or exited the house. After thoroughly checking, they realized that the only way to enter the house was through the main door. There were no other entrances or exits. What made things even more curious was that there were no signs of forced entry, no doors were broken, no windows shattered, and no locks tampered with. It seemed that whoever entered the house did so without any struggle, suggesting that the person might have been familiar with the household. This raised the unsettling possibility that the intruder could have been someone from within the family. Despite questioning Shawnaz and other family members repeatedly, the police were still at a loss for clear answers. They were determined to find some lead, so they asked Shawnaz for her mobile phone to further their investigation. Without any hesitation, Shawnaz handed over her iPhone, which she mentioned was a gift from her husband some time ago. The police carefully examined the phone and checked its call records, hoping to find a clue. But even after going through the details, they came up empty-handed. The police were baffled, but they couldn't shake the suspicion that someone within the family might be involved in the crime. The two children were still too young to be capable of such an act, so they were quickly ruled out as suspects. Even though it's possible for crimes to be committed at any age, the police's main focus turned toward Shawnaz. They decided to investigate quietly and subtly, talking to neighbors and questioning relatives without raising too much attention. They asked about everything from the time Shawnaz and Jafar Uddin got married to why Jafar Uddin had left Saudi Arabia and returned to India, and why he had chosen to live in Noida. During their inquiries, the police learned something curious. This was the first time in 2 years that Jafar Uddin had come to celebrate Eid near Shawnaz's family home. They couldn't help but wonder why he had decided to do so this year. As the investigation went on, more details began to surface, stories about Shawnaz and her past that added layers of complexity to the case. It was discovered that during her school years, Shawnaz had a boyfriend named Camel. They spent a lot of time together, and soon their friendship became the talk of the entire school. In a somewhat movie-like manner, they would walk around holding hands, which many people disapproved of. The issue eventually reached the teachers and then the principal. It was found that there was a boy and a girl openly showing their love, which was affecting the other students. The principal called both sets of parents and explained that their children's behavior was setting a bad example for others. He warned them that this was the time for studying, not for such activities. However, when the two didn't change their behavior, they were expelled from school. After this, Shawnaz joined another school while Camel continued his studies elsewhere for a while. Camel later decided to start working to save enough money to marry Shawnaz. They were both out of school, and this story became known to the neighbors and everyone around. In the end, Shawnaz's family discovered her relationship with Camel, but there was a big problem: money. Shawnaz's family was well off, while Camel came from a much poorer background. Because of this, Camel was not seen as a suitable match for marriage, especially since he wasn't doing anything noteworthy with his life. No parent would want to marry their daughter to someone who was unemployed. As time went on, the family became increasingly worried that Shawnaz's connection with Camel might hurt her chances of getting married to someone else, so they began searching for a good match for Shawnaz. But finding someone nearby was tough because everyone in the neighborhood knew about her history with Camel from their school days. Finally, through some relatives, they learned about a boy named Jafar Uddin. He was an electrical engineer working in Saudi Arabia, earning a good income, and had a solid reputation. When his family met Shawnaz, they quickly agreed to the proposal. The marriage was arranged, and Shawnaz and Jafar Uddin were married. After the marriage, Jafar Uddin returned to Saudi Arabia, leaving Shawnaz behind. Meanwhile, Shawnaz reconnected with her childhood love, Camel. Slowly, they grew close again. Jafar Uddin spent most of the year 11 months in Saudi Arabia and only came back home for 1 month during vacations, so he stayed unaware of what was happening. During this time, Shawnaz and Camel would meet secretly, rekindling their old romance. After a few years, Shawnaz's 2 sons were born. She and Camel continued their relationship, trying to keep it hidden from everyone. At some point, they became so close that they could not bear the thought of being apart. But there was a big problem: Shawnaz was married to Jafar Uddin, and it was impossible for her to get a divorce. Divorce would lead to social ridicule, shame, and disgrace, especially since the match had been well arranged by her family. So, Camel and Shawnaz decided to stay in touch, but keep their relationship under wraps. When Jafar Uddin returned home, They would pretend as if nothing was going on. However, over time, Kamal began to resent Jafar Yudin more and more. He felt that if Jafar Yudin were not in the picture, he and Shonaz could be together, but how could that happen? Eventually, they began to discuss ways to get rid of Jafar Yudin. They planned everything out, hoping to make it look like a natural death or an accidental death, so no one would suspect anything. On the night of May 3rd, the plan they had devised was set into motion. Shonaz put the kids to bed, knowing that Kamal would be arriving soon. After the children were asleep, she quietly let Kamal into the house. They had discussed that they would make it seem like a robbery. Kamal was supposed to kill Jafar Yudin using something that could be easily hidden, a pressure cooker. Kamal wanted to make sure the crime scene looked like a robbery gone wrong. At around 3 a.m., Kamal crept into the bedroom where Jafar Yudin was sleeping. He picked up the pressure cooker from the kitchen and used it to strike Jafar Yudin on the head multiple times. Jafar Yudin struggled briefly but ultimately succumbed to the blows. When Kamal was done, he left the cooker beside the body and took only Shonaz's jewelry to make it seem like a robbery. He then quickly fled the scene. Shonaz made up the story about being attacked by robbers to cover up the murder. The police finally pieced together the true story after investigating further, gathering evidence, and catching Kamal. Shonaz was arrested and confessed to her role in the crime. The motive, driven by an illicit affair and a desire to be with Kamal, had led her to plan her husband's murder. The tragedy shocked everyone who knew the couple and their seemingly happy life. But the investigation uncovered the dark truth behind the facade, bringing the guilty to justice.